The fighter planes of World War II were stranger and more experimental than most people realize, built in desperation, tested in secret, and flown when nothing else would work. These aircraft pushed the boundaries of what was possible, and some of them are so bizarre you will not believe they actually flew in combat. The Messerschmitt Me-163. Comet was the world's first operational rocket-powered fighter, and it was as dangerous to its pilots as it was to enemy bombers. This tiny German interceptor could reach 600 miles per hour, faster than anything else in the sky during World War II. It climbed like a bullet, reaching 30,000 feet in under 3 minutes. The rocket fuel was violently unstable, a toxic mix of chemicals that exploded on contact and dissolved human tissue. Pilots wore protective suits, but leaks were common. The plane had no landing gear, only a skid, making every landing a controlled crash. It carried only enough fuel for about 8 minutes of powered flight, so pilots had one chance to intercept bombers before gliding back to base. Despite its speed, the Me-163 was difficult to aim and shot down relatively few aircraft. Many pilots died from fuel explosions rather than combat. It was a glimpse of the future, but far too dangerous for its time. The Northrop XP-56 Black Bullet was an all-wing American fighter that looked like it flew in from another century. With no tail and a pusher propeller mounted behind the cockpit, it resembled a flying wedge more than a traditional aircraft. The design was intended to reduce drag and increase speed, but it proved nearly impossible to control. During test flights, the Black Bullet suffered from severe instability, rolling and pitching unpredictably. The contra-rotating propellers were supposed to eliminate torque, but they created dangerous vibrations instead. On one test flight, the aircraft went into an uncontrollable roll and crashed, though the pilot survived. Only 2 prototypes were built before the program was cancelled. The radical design was ahead of its time, but the technology needed to make it work simply did not exist yet. It remains one of the most unusual aircraft ever tested by the United States military. The Kyushu J-7W Shinden was Japan's desperate attempt to create a high-speed interceptor in the final months of the war. This canard fighter had its propeller at the back and small wings at the front, creating a forward-swept configuration, unlike anything else flying. The design was meant to improve maneuverability and to give the pilot an unobstructed forward view. Only one prototype was completed, and it made just 2 test flights before Japan surrendered. Pilots said it handled well in the air, but there was not enough time to work out the problems. The rear-mounted engine made the aircraft nose-heavy, and the propeller placement raised concerns about safety during crashes. If the war had continued, Japan planned to mass-produce the Shinden to defend against American bombers. Instead, it became a footnote, a fascinating what-if in aviation history that never had the chance to prove itself in combat. The Blohm & Voss Bv-141 was a German reconnaissance plane, so asymmetrical it looked like a design mistake. The fuselage and engine were offset to one side, while the cockpit sat in a separate glass nacelle on the other side, giving the crew an unobstructed view. It looked impossible, like it should tumble out of the sky the moment it left the ground. But it flew surprisingly well. The asymmetry was intentional, designed to give the observer and gunner maximum visibility without the engine blocking their view. Pilots reported it was stable and easy to handle despite its bizarre appearance. However, the Luftwaffe never adopted it for mass production, partly because it was too strange, and partly because other designs were already in service. Only a few prototypes were built. The Bv-141 remains one of the most visually striking and unconventional aircraft ever designed, proof that aerodynamics do not always follow symmetry. The Vought V-173 Flying Pancake was an American experimental fighter that looked exactly like its nickname. It had a flat, circular wing with 2 massive propellers mounted at the wingtips. The idea was to create an aircraft that could fly slowly for carrier landings, but also reach high speeds in combat. Test pilots called it stable and surprisingly maneuverable, but it vibrated so badly at certain speeds that it was almost unflyable, The propellers created severe vibrations that shook the entire airframe, and the engines were underpowered for its weight. Despite its problems, the V-173 proved the concept worked, and a larger, faster version called the XF-5U was built. But by the time it was ready for testing, jet engines had made propeller fighters obsolete. The program was cancelled, and the Flying Pancake was retired. It never saw combat, but it inspired future vertical takeoff designs decades later. The Heinkel He-162 Volksjäger was Germany's last-ditch attempt to flood the skies with cheap, mass-produced jet fighters flown by Hitler Youth pilots with minimal training. Built primarily from wood to save metal, it could be assembled by unskilled laborers in underground factories. The jet engine was mounted on top of the fuselage, making the engine prone to catching fire and burning the entire aircraft. It was fast, over 500 miles per hour, but it was also unstable and unforgiving. Inexperienced pilots often lost control during takeoff or landing, and many died in accidents rather than combat. The glue holding the wooden frame together sometimes failed in flight, causing wings to disintegrate mid-air. Despite these flaws, over 300 were built in the final months of the war. A few saw combat, but they had little impact. The Volksjäger was a symbol of desperation, a fighter built not to win, but to delay the inevitable. The Curtiss XP-55 Ascender was an American pusher propeller fighter with a canard design and a rear-mounted engine. It looked futuristic, with swept wings and a nose that tapered to a point. The Army Air Forces hoped it would be faster and more maneuverable than conventional fighters, but it turned out to be a disappointment. The rear propeller made the aircraft dangerously unstable, especially during stalls. On one test flight, the prototype entered an unrecoverable spin and crashed, killing the pilot. A second prototype was built, but it suffered from poor performance and limited range. The Ascender was slower than expected, and its unusual design made it difficult to maintain. By the time testing was complete, conventional fighters like the P-51 Mustang were already dominating the skies. Only 3 prototypes were built before the program was scrapped. It was an ambitious experiment, but one that proved unconventional designs did not always mean better. The Focke-Wulf Triebflügel was a vertical takeoff interceptor that never left the drawing board, but its design was so bizarre it deserves mention. The entire wing rotated around the fuselage like a massive propeller with ramjet engines mounted at the tips. The idea was that it could take off vertically like a helicopter, then transition to horizontal flight once airborne. It would have stood on its tail during takeoff and landing, with the pilot lying on his back in the cockpit. Engineers believed it could reach speeds over 600 miles per hour and intercept bombers without needing a runway. But the war ended before a prototype could be built, and the concept was abandoned. The rotating wing design was never tested, and many experts believe it would have been uncontrollable in flight. It remains one of the strangest aircraft designs ever seriously considered. The Supermarine Spiteful was Britain's attempt to improve upon the legendary Spitfire by giving it laminar flow wings and increased speed. The new wings were thinner and more aerodynamic, designed to reduce drag and push the Spiteful past 450 miles per hour. It looked similar to the Spitfire, but it was a completely new aircraft underneath. Flight tests showed it was indeed faster, but it had problems. The laminar flow wings were difficult to manufacture and easily damaged, losing their efficiency if the surface was scratched or dented. The aircraft also suffered from poor low-speed handling, making it dangerous during takeoff and landing. By the time it was ready for production, the war was ending and jet fighters were on the horizon. Only a handful were built and none saw combat. The Spiteful was a victim of bad timing, a piston-engine fighter arriving just as the jet age began. The Fisher P-75 Eagle was supposed to be America's ultimate long-range escort fighter, built from the best parts of other aircraft. It used the wings of a P-51, the tail of a Douglas A-24, and the landing gear from a Vought F-4U Corsair. The idea was to save time and money by reusing proven components. But instead of creating a superfighter, they built a disaster. This mixture of parts created weight and balance problems, making the airplane unstable. The engine was underpowered, and overall performance was far below expectations. Test pilots hated it, saying it was difficult to control and prone to mechanical failures. The Army cancelled the program after only a few prototypes were built. None ever saw combat. The Eagle proved that you could not just bolt together parts from different planes and expect them to work. It was an expensive failure that embarrassed everyone involved. The Nakajima Kicker was Japan's first turbojet aircraft, heavily influenced by the German Me-262, but smaller and lighter. It was designed as a kamikaze plane that could carry a bomb and crash into Allied ships at high speed. The jet engines gave it the speed to avoid interception, making it far more dangerous than propeller-driven kamikaze aircraft. Only 2 prototypes were completed before the war ended, and neither saw combat. Test flights showed it was fast and maneuverable, but the engines were unreliable and prone to flameouts. Japan lacked the industrial capacity to produce jet engines in large numbers, and fuel shortages made testing difficult. If the war had lasted longer, the Kicker might have become a serious threat. Instead, it remains a footnote, a glimpse of what Japan might have achieved with more time and resources. The Ambrosini SAI-207 was an Italian experimental fighter with a unique engine-mounted cannon that fired through the propeller hub. This centerline gun gave it exceptional accuracy, but the aircraft itself was mediocre. It was designed as a lightweight interceptor that could be built quickly and cheaply, but it suffered from poor performance and handling issues. The engine lacked power, and the aircraft was slower than most Allied fighters. Only a few prototypes were built, and none entered production. By the time it was ready for testing, Italy had already surrendered and switched sides. The SAI-207 never saw combat, and it was quickly forgotten. It was another example of a promising idea, hampered by limited resources and bad timing. Italian aviation had fallen behind, and no amount of clever engineering could close the gap. The Martin Baker MB-5 was Britain's attempt to build the ultimate piston engine fighter, incorporating every lesson learned during the war. It featured a powerful Rolls-Royce Griffon engine, contra-rotating propellers to eliminate torque, and advanced aerodynamics. Test pilots raved about it, calling it one of the best handling fighters they had ever flown. It was fast, maneuverable, and beautifully engineered. But it arrived too late. By the time the prototype flew in 1944, jet fighters were already in development, and the Royal Air Force had no interest in ordering another piston engine design. Only one prototype was built. The MB-5 never entered production and never saw combat. It was a masterpiece that nobody wanted, a perfect example of brilliant engineering rendered obsolete by technological progress. Today, it's remembered as the best fighter that never was. The Dornier Du 335 File was the fastest piston engine fighter Germany ever built, with 2 engines, one in the nose and one in the tail. This push and pull configuration gave it incredible speed, reaching over 470 miles per hour. It could outrun almost anything in the sky, including early jets. But it was also heavy, complex, and difficult to produce. The rear propeller was dangerous for the pilot during ejection, so Dornier designed an explosive system that blew off the tail and the rear propeller before the pilot could bail out. The aircraft handled well for its size, but it arrived too late to make a difference. Only a few dozen were built before the war ended, and even fewer saw combat. Pilots who flew it praised its speed and firepower, but there simply weren't enough of them. The Do 335 was a glimpse of what Germany might have achieved with more time. Miles M20 was Britain's backup fighter. It was designed to be built quickly if Spitfire and Hurricane production lines were bombed. It used simple construction techniques and non-strategic materials, with a fixed landing gear and minimal equipment. The idea was that it could be produced in furniture factories by workers with no aircraft experience. It flew well enough, but it was slower and less capable than the fighters already in service. Fortunately, British factories were never destroyed, so the M20 was never needed. Only 2 prototypes were built before the program was cancelled. It remains an interesting what-if, a fighter designed for a crisis that never came. The M20 showed that Britain was prepared for the worst, even if the worst never happened. The VG-33 was France's most promising fighter at the outbreak of the war, designed to compete with the Messerschmitt Bf 109. It was fast, maneuverable, and well-armed, with excellent performance at high altitude. Test pilots were impressed, and the French Air Force placed large orders. But production was painfully slow. By the time France fell in 1940, only a handful had been delivered, and none saw significant combat. Most were destroyed on the ground or captured by the Germans. A few continued flying under Vichy French control, but they had no impact on the war. The VG-33 was a capable fighter that arrived too late. If production had started earlier, it might have changed the Battle of France. Instead, it became another symbol of France's unpreparedness. The Reggiane Re 2005 was Italy's best fighter of the war, equal or superior to the Spitfire and Bf 109 in many respects. It was fast, agile, and heavily armed, with excellent handling at all altitudes. Pilots who flew it considered it the finest Italian aircraft ever built. But Italy's collapsing industrial base meant only a few dozen were produced. Most saw action defending against Allied bombers over Italy, where they performed admirably. But there were simply too few to make a difference. The RE 2005 arrived too late, in too small numbers, to change Italy's fate. Like so many late war designs, it was a glimpse of what might have been if time and resources had been available. It remains a favorite among aviation enthusiasts who recognize its potential. The Curtiss-Wright XP-55 Ascender was designed with a rear-mounted engine and a canard configuration, intended to provide better visibility and performance. It looked sleek and futuristic, with a pusher propeller and swept wings. But it flew poorly. The aircraft was tail-heavy, making it prone to stalling and spinning. During one test flight, it entered a flat spin and crashed, killing the pilot. A second prototype was built, but it suffered from similar problems. The Army Air Forces lost interest, and the program was cancelled. Only 3 prototypes were ever built. The Ascender was an ambitious attempt to rethink fighter design, but it proved that radical ideas do not always work in practice. It remains a cautionary tale about the dangers of untested concepts. The Kawasaki Ki 100 was Japan's accidental masterpiece, created when engineers installed a radial engine in an airframe designed for an inline engine. The result was one of the best Japanese fighters of the war. It was fast, maneuverable, and easy to fly, with excellent performance at all altitudes. Pilots loved it, and it proved effective against American B-29 bombers. But it arrived too late. By 1945, Japan lacked the fuel, pilots, and industrial capacity to produce it in meaningful numbers. Only a few hundred were built, and they had little impact on the war's outcome. If the Ki 100 had been available earlier, it might have made a real difference. Instead, it became another example of Japanese ingenuity undermined by dwindling resources. The Heinkel He 100 was a German fighter that broke speed records but was never mass-produced. It was faster than the Bf 109, with a top speed exceeding 400 miles per hour. It featured an innovative evaporative cooling system that reduced drag and improved performance. The cooling system was complex and unreliable, making it difficult to maintain in combat conditions. Heinkel also lacked production capacity, and the Luftwaffe was already committed to the Bf 109. Only a handful of Heinkel He 100 aircraft were built, and they were used mostly for propaganda purposes. Photos of them were circulated to make Germany's air force appear larger than it was. The Heinkel He 100 was a fast, capable fighter that never got its chance. It remains a reminder that speed alone does not guarantee success. If one of these forgotten fighter planes surprised you, tell us which one in the comments, like the video, and subscribe for more unbelievable stories from World War II.